How are God's standards not subjective?
Subjectivity means that it's based upon your own personal preference. God's standards can't be subjective to himself, because subjectivity means it's dependent upon some other condition, where God has a quality of what's called aseity. That means he is independent of all things, non-contingent, and immutable. So therefore, his infinite, absolute, complete, total character is that part of what he is, and therefore the morals are the necessary result of his existence. And so he is telling us and revealing his character. We are the people who have to deal with the issue of objectivity and subjectivity. Because atheists, what they like to do is subjectively apply an attempt at objective morals, which they can't justify, upon God himself. And that's the problem. So I have a moral, and just as Glenn had a moral, he has a certain opinion. That's subjective because it's based on a personal opinion. But it doesn't apply the same way that it's just God's opinion in that it's arbitrary. It does not depend on God's opinion. It depends on God's character, so therefore it's not subjective, it's objective. Okay?
Makes sense to me. Matt, when was the last time that you spoke to a consistent atheist?
It happened about 6 months ago. I was on Pal Talk, and I spoke to a consistent atheist who admitted that he didn't have a moral base, admitted he couldn't ground logic, admitted that his opinions were nothing more than his subjective expressions of his desires. And it was an interesting discussion.
Interesting. I would have liked to hear that one. Next we have Benny Ocean, and you spoke to him, I think, 2 times before. So, Benny, I'd like to keep it to about a maximum of 15 minutes, because we've got another person here who wants to talk to Matt. So, welcome, Benny. How are you tonight?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Morality is sort of my favorite topic right now, so I guess I'll just bounce off of what you just said about aseity, is that God is self-existent, he's not contingent, he's not contingent. It's confusing to me how he just laid this out, because it almost sounded like he conflated the property of aseity with God has to be right about everything. He has to be omniscient. I don't see those as being the same. You could have an evil, you could have a being with aseity that is objectively evil, that just it made a universe just to hurt things. So I mean, I don't see why the property of aseity would mean that God would be right about anything. I mean,
well, they're different things. Are you an atheist by any chance?
Oh, you've talked to me twice before. You should know this by now.
I'm sorry. I talk to a lot of people, and I forget. I really do. You're an atheist?
Yeah, I'm a secular. I just call myself non-religious.
So you're an atheist?
Well, I just prefer the label non-religious. But
are you an atheist?
If you prefer that label, that's fine.
I'm asking you what you are.
Well, I don't. Sure. I mean, it's fine. Yeah.
Okay. God's aseity deals with his non-contingency and his eternal nature and immutability. It's not an issue of his character at this point. So aseity is an issue of his essence and self-sufficiency, and his moral revelation deals with the character that he possesses. They're different issues. So you don't want to make a category mistake. And it's kind of interesting. I'd like you to, if you would be willing to, write up a little bit of a thing, because it's hard to explain it right now on the cuff, but how you think I'm conflating the issue of aseity with his moral character. The reason I'm asking you to do that is because maybe I am, and I'm not seeing it. And I want to make sure I don't make mistakes like that. If you have a good argument, I'd like to hear it. But I don't think you do, but maybe you do.
Well, I didn't plan on going in this direction, but
okay.
The last few words you said to Glenn, you mentioned aseity, and then you said that morality would flow from his aseity, which I don't think that makes sense, because...
I think you're right. I think I misspoke. I would say that, yeah, I think you're right. I would just say that it comes out of his character, and I'd separate his aseity from the moral revelation. And the aseity has to do with his eternalness and self-sufficiency, where his moral character deals with his character revelation. I think you've got a good point there.
Well, let me just, I don't have a lot of time this week, so I just wanted to jump into it. As you use this example about torturing babies. Is it always wrong to torture babies for fun? And I'm wondering why you would choose that particular example. What is it about that example that is so undeniably evil, harmful, bad, that you would pick that as your go-to? Why that example?
Because it's always wrong, as God declares murder to be wrong. So I'm just giving a moral absolute. It's a good one to go to.
Well, what is it about that action that is morally objectionable? What is it about that action itself that, philosophers talk about things like good making properties, great making properties. We can talk about evil making properties, or bad making properties, or immoral making properties. I'm saying, what is it about that action of killing babies for fun? What are the immoral making properties of that action?
Well, I'm not going to adopt a secular philosophical thing here. I'm going to tell you that the answer is God has declared that murder is wrong. Torturing babies to death is murder. Therefore, that's why it's wrong. That's why I would pick it, because it's a good example of a moral atrocity. I hope you would agree that that's wrong.
I do, but I think I have a reason for thinking that. I mean, when I say, because of the harm being done, and I think that you would probably, in this case, if there was no harm being done, I don't know if you could think of an example that would work in the same way that this one does, where there's no harm being done to anyone or anything.
So how do you know that you're not conflating the ends with the means? You're saying here's an action, but the ends, the harm, is wrong. So therefore, the torture is wrong because it harms people. But then you arbitrarily pick, harm. That's the standard now.
Well, no, it's not arbitrary. I mean, that's the thing. It's not arbitrary.
Yes, it is. Tell me why it's not.
Okay. Well, I think that, we kind of butted horns on the definition of morality. You would say it's in conjunction with God's character, and I would use more of a dictionary definition of what the term morality means. I mean, so when I say I'm talking about how to behave to promote well-being in society or whatever, and that doesn't, that's going to run into harm. There's no way to avoid the fact that you're talking about positive and negative states of consciousness, and this has to come down to harm, right? So, and that's why you would choose an example like murdering babies or torturing babies, because...
Of course. I want to be as difficult for the atheists as possible. I want them to stumble over it. I want it to serve the purpose of exposing their inconsistencies. Of course. Of course.
Okay. Well, I mean, I think that you don't really want to admit it, but I think that if you weren't playing the role of the apologist, we probably would see eye to eye much more closely on morality than you might let on, because I think that my vision of morality is not outrageously different from your own, and I think that you understand what I mean when I say when I'm talking about morality, and why I would link it so closely with harm being done, and why anyone else would also, because I mean, if you just say, we're not talking about harm, it's got nothing to do with harm, then you're not really talking about morality anymore. You're talking about something, but you're not really talking about...
Why is harm the final standard?
Well, if I tried to say, I'm going to paint a wall yellow or red, I mean, is that a moral... It doesn't hurt anything, right? I mean, it might be... Could we call this a moral... It's a preference. You could say, I want my room to be yellow or red or some other color, but it doesn't really... It doesn't cause anything. It's just a preference. I mean, if I put a lawn decoration in my lawn and it's a triangle, or a pyramid versus a sphere, is the pyramid more moral than the sphere? I mean, it doesn't affect anything. It doesn't affect anything positively or negatively. It doesn't harm anything. It doesn't help anything. These are not moral questions. So, I mean, if we're going to say, how do we know when we're asking moral questions I think the only way that we're asking moral questions is if it has the potential to affect positively or negatively the experience of conscious creatures like ourselves.
Wow. You are walking subjectivity. If it affects positive or negatively, which is what?
Sure.
Subjective.
What does that mean? No,
appealing to subjectivity all the time.
No. Positively or negatively could exist in an objective viewpoint or a subjective viewpoint, of course.
And so let me ask you, is it always wrong for anyone to torture babies to death merely for their personal pleasure? Is it? Is that a true or false statement?
Yeah, I mean, in the sense that you can make universal moral statements, it's a true moral statement. It's not true like the mathematical value of gravity. It's a different type of a truth. But I would say that yes, I think it is a type of truth. Yeah, I think so.
Okay, it's true. So you believe in universal moral truths.
Well,
at least one.
Like I said, it's not the same as you'd say, like, gravity. But there are things.
I'm not talking about gravity. I'm talking about this statement right here. You agree that it is a universal moral truth. How do you justify that universal moral truth that is always wrong for anyone? Always has to do with time. Anyone is universality. It's a universal truth statement. How do you ground that from your atheistic perspective?
Well, that's a good question. I don't think I've gotten to this with you before, but to have any kind of a secular morality, you have to have some kind of basic axiomatic something that you just accept. Because if you can't start with nowhere. It goes to Hume, to the is-ought problem. If you just have an is, you don't get the ought. But if you have an is and some kind of a goal, if you have an is and some kind of an axiom that's accepted, then you can start to make these types of judgments, moral judgments, for example. So if you say, it is the case this, and we have the goal that, then we can X, Y, and Z, we can say this is how we ought to behave. If you don't have any kind of goal in mind, then you can't say what you ought to do, because you need a goal to plan out a course of action.
Hume did not bridge the is-ought gap.
He didn't. I'm bridging it in the case of morality right now. I'm saying that if you have a goal in mind, if you have something, and luckily we do. I mean, luckily most of us actually want the world to be better.
Argumentum ad populum.
No, I'm not saying that makes it. I'm not saying that's what makes it true. I'm saying that if we have that goal, then we can take action. And look, at least one other thing I wanted to say is that I don't think Christianity actually provides any kind of objective moral foundation. I mean, you claim that there's God and that He provides it, but you don't actually have access to it.
Yeah, we do. The Bible.
Yeah, there's all kinds of horrendous stuff in the Bible. So
like what?
Like Numbers 31. Go kill all the Midianites and kill everyone, kill the women, kill the men, kill the young boys, kill the infants, but keep the young virgin girls for yourself for purposes unspecified.
Okay, so that's morally wrong?
Yeah.
And how do you know?
I'm just appealing to my conventional secular morality.
There you go. In other words, it's just your subjective opinion.
Do you think it's morally right?
I'd have to read the context and see, so I can't make a judgment on it. Because, believe it or not, I don't have all the answers in the Bible.
So there is a context where it would be appropriate to kill everyone in a village, but keep the young virgin girls for yourself. I don't know the context. There is such a thing as a context that would make that right. That's what you're saying.
I don't know the context.
But you're saying that the context is important, and that the context could actually justify this action.
How about this? I lack belief in the context.
Okay. Well, I don't think It's a very famous verse.
Yeah, and I'll have to go read it and look at it and see what context is going on and see, because there's a lot more there than what people realize when they criticize, when they bring something up out of Scripture, and when I have done my homework on things, I just find they weren't considering this or this or this or how things were working, and so I haven't done that on that one in particular. So excuse me, even after all these decades, I've not done that.
Yeah,
the thing is, even if you want to say that it is morally wrong, you're entitled to your opinion, but you don't have the right to say that it is by nature morally wrong. The only way you could do that is to appeal to an objective moral lawgiver outside of yourself. You can't say that something is universally true or false merely because of your subjective opinion, because you cannot have a subjective opinion also be a universal objective truth. It's self-refuting. But what you're doing when I give you this statement, is it always wrong for anyone to torture babies to death merely for the personal pleasure? You're saying subjectively it is an objective truth. which is self-refuting. You can't do that in your atheistic perspective.
Anything that I'm a subjective person. So I mean, and so are Christians. They might not want to admit it. And the Bible, it exists as an objective object in the physical universe, but it's not objectively true. You just declare it as a subjective person. You declare that it is objectively true. I mean, that might be satisfying for you. It's not satisfying for anyone who doesn't happen to believe the same.
Presuppositionally, it works.
Presuppositionally, you can presuppose anything. You can presuppose any other book. Why not? Sure, start with any presupposition. It doesn't prove anything.
Well, the Quran is self-refuting.
Okay, well, so is the Bible.
How?
It makes claims, contradictory claims. There's several contradictions, hundreds of contradictions in the Bible.
Give me one.
Like an all-loving God who tortures people for eternity.
Well, how's that a contradiction?
Torture isn't loving.
So he's all loving, but he's nothing else?
It doesn't matter. You just need to point out contradictory attributes.
So you misrepresent the Christian God.
No, it's just not important. There's 100. No, you don't need to describe 100.
Does it mean he's not also holy and that he's not also just?
You can call it that, but it doesn't appear to be so to me. Right?
If you're going to attack the Christian God, you should at least know what the Christian God is, and you should accurately represent him. Because if you were to take one aspect of a painting and say this one little aspect represents the whole, that's not the right way to do things. You shouldn't do that. And so you don't know the issue of God and his omniscience. You don't know about his omnipotence. You don't know about his justice and his holiness and his love and his mercy and his grace and how they have to blend together. And so if you don't know those, how are you going to be able to tell us what is? Because you say he's all loving, but then you negate any other attributes that he possesses, then judge him on one as you compare with something else. That's not the right way to do it.
I can tell you exactly why. It's just you don't need a full list of attributes. If I tell you my brother is he's a painter and he's not a painter. Okay, if I give you don't need to know anything else about my brother. I just told you one fact and then another fact that refutes it. You don't need to know the rest of his attributes. It's not germane to this conversation. No, but what I'm trying to say is that when you try to posit this loving God who tortures people for eternity, and that's just one thing, I can point to others. I can point to specific verses. I can point to how the Gospels contradict each other. I can point to prophecies that are described different ways, histories that are described different ways. When was Jesus born? Who was the ruler when Jesus was born? I mean, it goes on and on.
Hold on. You have some principles you got wrong here. When you say he's a painter and not a painter, you're also, if you mean it in the same sense in the same way, you're violating the second law of logic, the law of non-contradiction.
Exactly. Yes.
But you're doing that. If you're going to offer me a self-refuting statement to back up your example, it doesn't work. When the Bible says he's loving, it does not also say he's also not loving. He's a painter, not a painter. He's loving and not loving. You didn't offer that.
I did.
God is holy.
No, I said eternal torture. I said he tortures billions of people for eternity, which to me is not loving.
Just.
So he's
it's
loving.
Called justice.
No, it's not. It's not
yes,
loving
it
or
is.
just. No, it's not.
It's just.
Infinite torture is not just.
You are not the arbitrator of what is and is not just for the holy God.
Well, then who is, though?
God is.
But there's no God here. There's only you and me. So if there's only us, and we have to talk to each other, and come to some kind of an understanding about this. So how do we figure it out? Why not?
Well, your worldview doesn't make sense. Mine does. Your worldview can't account for objective morality. Mine can. Your worldview cannot account for rationality. Mine can. Your worldview cannot account for our own existence. Mine can. Your worldview cannot account for information. Mine can. Your worldview doesn't work. Mine does. From inside my worldview, things make sense. But it has explanatory power. Yet you reject it and you uphold a position that does not have explanatory power. That's irrational.
Sometimes having answers is not better than having an honest, I don't know. You have lots of answers. I'll grant you that. You have answers. They're not good answers. You have answers.
Okay. They're answers, but they're not good answers. I show your illogic, and I show how you misrepresent God, and yet you don't work with that.
You have a belief in a God who, if real, would explain all of these things. But just because you believe if X is true, then all of these other things logically follow. I'll grant you that. If X is true, if God is real, then all of these other things, and you have solutions for everything. I just don't grant you that X is true. I mean, because it's not evidently true. It's just, it's posited, it's stipulated, it's believed by many people. That doesn't make it true. Okay, you would have solutions for things that would have explanatory power if X were true, but it doesn't appear to be true.
If it has explanatory power and your position does not, why would you hold a position that doesn't have the explanatory power?
Because there's not evidence that your hypothesis is correct. It's a hypothesis that, if true, would have explanatory power, but it's not evidently the case. It's just...
Yes, it is.
No, it's not.
You appeal to a universal moral absolute when you agree it's always wrong to torture babies indefinitely for personal pleasure. You agree that's universally wrong. But yet, you can't defend it as being wrong from your atheistic perspective. I can, from the Christian ones. You agree with me. It's universally morally a true statement, but you can't even justify that from your perspective.
I can defend it, but the thing is, you started out by just saying you're declaring the, what do you call it, divine command. I mean, you're saying that divine command is right.
No, it's not divine command theory.
Okay, well,
that's not the representation of the Christian position. Atheists very often misrepresent the Christian perspective.
You're saying it's right because of something contingent upon God, and that you might not want to call it divine command, but that's pretty much what it comes down to.
God revealed that of his character. It's not an arbitrary command. That the atheists, again, misrepresent the Christian perspective.
Okay, so the whole point, though, is that religious morality is going to be based on a top-down way of thinking. It's going to be authority-based, that things are wrong because of some authority figure, whereas a secular moral system or moral principles are going to be based on a bottom-up model where you reason about the natural world and you say, well, how do things work, and what do we want to achieve, what do we want to accomplish? And so it's not top down, it's not based on authority, it's not because some boss man said so, it's based on different kinds of reasons, and you don't acknowledge those reasons as being good reasons. You say that they're arbitrary, and I understand your reasoning for saying that, but it's just it's a foundational paradigm that's different between your way of thinking and my way of thinking. It doesn't mean that you're right or I'm right, it's just that it's very difficult to bridge that gap when you're determined to have this authority figure, and someone like myself, I don't see how the authority figure helps, and in fact, I think it hurts, if anything. I mean, it prevents progress. Well, it prevents progress. When you say something like slavery is good, then...
If there's a phenomena that has, and you want to presuppose an idea to explain it, and that presupposition ends up working, you end up affirming that assumption to begin with. If it does not work, rationally speaking, you should abandon it. Christianity has the explanatory power in the issues of morality, our existence, and rationality, information. Atheism does not, yet you hold to it. It's not an issue of intellect, it's an issue of the will.
Okay, well, let's, I think that's a good place to end it.
All right, have a good night, Matt. It's been fun talking with you.
Hey, enjoyed talking to you, Ben.